Up next, we're going to explore something different, the future of health. We were hoping to have Dr. Carl June here this morning. His groundbreaking work on CAR T-cell therapy has revolutionized cancer treatment and earned him global recognition as one of the most influential figures in modern medicine. Unfortunately, due to weather-related issues, he's not able to be here, but the panel will still cover his incredible work. We're truly thrilled to be joined by Dr. David Brailer, who has a PhD from Wharton in economics and serves as the Chief Health Officer of Cigna. Dr. Simeon George, the CEO and managing partner of SR1, and Marissa King, the Alice Y. Hung President's Distinguished Professor and faculty co-lead of the Wharton Healthcare Analytics Lab, who will moderate this discussion. I'm excited to listen, so join me in welcoming them.
Thank you so much for joining us today. From CRISPR to CAR T, we're in the midst of a biotech revolution. Therapies that once seemed like science fiction are now delivering cures for a wide range of diseases, from cancer to rare disorders. But despite the amazing progress that we've made, we're also facing an increasingly difficult set of headwinds, from market failures to regulatory issues. And so today we have a delightful set of panelists today to talk about how we can ensure that despite these challenges, the magic of medicine continues. And since we can't have Carl with us, we were joking backstage that we should have had a Carl bot, given the last conversation, that seems apt. But since we don't have that, we wanted to give you a first-hand glimpse through video into the incredible work that's being done at Penn through Carl's lab.
The team at Penn Medicine celebrating FDA approval of a therapy they created to treat leukemia, featured in a new documentary called Of Medicine and Miracles.
The world of cancer is forever changed today.
Dr. Carl June led the team in creating the world's first CAR T-cell therapy.
He can see things that others cannot see.
It reprograms a patient's own immune cells to kill their cancer.
It's been a surprise all the way along, and I'm such a privileged person to be able to see actually the results of these. It's almost 30 years of experiments.
The other star of the documentary is Emily Whitehead, who had a long battle with acute lymphoblastic leukemia.
And you could take her home and enjoy the days you have left with her.
In desperation, Emily's parents turned to the team at Penn and CHOP in 2012.
We were just hoping for anything because this was really her last chance.
It was a roller coaster, but after 5 years, Emily's cancer was gone.
They keep telling us, that Emily's right in the history books because she was the first child in the world with her immune system trained to beat her leukemia.
The Whitehead started a foundation to support cancer research. Overall, you feel good?
Yeah.
And this is Emily now, a decade of being cancer-free and officially cured. You're 17 and you've been on an amazing journey.
Yeah, it really has been amazing, and I'm super grateful.
And about to be a star in a documentary about her remarkable survival that's premiering at the Tribeca Film Festival.
I'm hoping that it can spread awareness.
It's as close to a miracle as I've ever seen. She came so close to death many times. And then now there's more than 15,000 people who've been treated with what she first got here in Philadelphia.
And Dr. June says immunotherapy is now being used on a growing number of patients. Emily says she is looking at colleges and wants to study filmmaking and environmental sciences. And the name of that documentary, probably going to want to check it out someday, Of Medicine and Miracles. It looks terrific.
So Simeon, you've played a key role in bringing some of these miracles to market. And I would love for you to get us started just by sharing a little bit about how we can think about exactly where biotech fits within the healthcare landscape.
Sure, thank you. And thank you for having me here today. I'm sorry Carl can't be here, but we will do our best without the chatbot. So yeah, I think it's helpful, I think, for this audience in particular to sort of contextualize how biotech propels the industry forward in not just life sciences, but healthcare more broadly. So if you take a step back, I think you guys are familiar in terms of as overall GDP, healthcare is close to 20%. And I'd say most of the estimates show that it's going to grow well into the 20s, maybe hit even 30% plus over the next decade or two. So it's a major source, certainly, of spend and infrastructure and capabilities within the economy. And if you look within healthcare, you look at the total size of the market by revenues, it's a little over 20 trillion is the most recent estimate that I saw globally. And that number is expected to double over the next few years, between now and, frankly, the end of this decade, so going to over 40 trillion. And if you look within healthcare, you'll see that life sciences is the largest segment within healthcare in terms of the revenues. And so I've seen estimates from anywhere between 15 to 30% of that 20 trillion number is the life sciences segment. And life sciences incorporates biopharma, medical devices, diagnostics, health IT. And so if you think about that segment, biopharma, so biotech and pharma, is anywhere from 70 to 80% of this largest segment within healthcare. So in my view, biotechnology is truly the engine that's driving the broader healthcare industry. And if you look, there's an interesting stat that I read recently, which will seem obvious in terms of like comparing and contrasting. So if you look at the big 7 technology companies, the Magnificent Seven, their market capitalization right now is, as of early June, is a little over 17 trillion. And if you compare that to healthcare and the pharma companies, the top 7 companies, including Eli Lilly at this moment in time and Novo, which are obviously driving the obesity market, that market cap is roughly 2.5 trillion. So technology companies, 17 trillion. Pharma companies, 2.5 trillion. And so there's a question mark around for such a large segment of the overall economy, why do the largest healthcare companies, why are they trading where they are? And I think the Wharton audience will know, in general, you trade based on expectations of future earning potential discounted to today. And so the challenge within pharma has been historically that their productivity has been challenged. It's working closer to Eroom's law than Moore's law. And they are faced with a patent cliff, which means that their top-line products lose exclusivity within a few years. And to put that into context, between now and the end of this decade, so 2025 to 2030, roughly 45% of the top-line revenue of pharma companies will go away. And so that means they have to constantly reinvent themselves. And if you then look at product approvals, whether it's FDA or EMEA in Europe, roughly 70% of product approvals come from biotech. The originator company is the small company, the startup that either partners with or is acquired or was working independently. And so going back to the premise behind this segment here, biotech is truly the innovation engine that drives the largest segment within healthcare forward. And that's why it's critical that we're thoughtful around how we think about investments, how we think about risk, and ultimately how do we impact patient care so that you have the types of incomes, the types of outcomes that you see with Emily and other patients that are suffering from these diseases.
Thanks for getting us started. I love that comment about thinking about biotech as the innovation engine. And I'd love to hear from you, David. You've sat in so many different roles throughout the healthcare industry. How you think that engine is functioning? Or do we think that there's sort of clear speed ahead, or do you think that there's some challenges that there is currently facing the industry?
Sure, Marissa, happy to. But before I do that, I just want to say that I have for years, anytime I've been on the stage, chosen to wear very loud socks, usually red striped. And today I chose to tone it down because it's Wharton and we got to be a bit conservative. And then I look over and see that Simeon's not wearing socks at all. So I misplayed this hand completely. I'll tell you a story. When I was a resident at Penn, one of the patients that we would frequently see was a young African-American male who would come in with a sickle cell anemia crisis. So sickle cell is something that happens where the blood cells can't flow well, you can't oxygenate. It's a painful, often quite damaging crisis that ends up in end organ damage and young deaths. And these people are committed to numerous visits to emergency rooms and hospitals, and just an absence of a lot of the things that you would consider the fundamentals of life. And I will fast forward to our company owns one of our businesses is the largest specialty pharmaceutical distribution business in the U.S. And we had the privilege of treating the first commercial patient who received Casgevy one of the two sickle cell gene therapy products. The other one is Lyfgenia, which is a CRISPR product. But that child, after going through a 3-month process of induction and complex care during this process and then recovery, is now 8 months out with no crisis. And in the studies for these drugs, now lasting up to 4 years of follow-up, these patients effectively function fully normally and could be expected to have a normal life expectancy. That's one drug. There are now about 250 cellular and molecular therapies of that potential on the market, and our IP team forecasts there are 500 more coming down the road between now and 2032. So we're at the dawn, I think, of a clinical miracle that will get to the very fundamentals of rewriting our genome and rewriting how disease is expressed. As you may know, there are gene therapies in process for cardiovascular disease and metabolic disease. So basically, rather than taking your cholesterol pill, you can get your cholesterol gene therapy. I'm not sure that's a good idea, but people might do that. My point being, this epiphany will change everything clinically, and we can talk more about how it will change the industry, industry structure, industry economics, but it is finally here, and it's going to be with us now perpetually.
Thank you so much for that and providing that context. I feel like unless you've seen these drugs work, it's hard to imagine the real impact that they have. But it really is nothing short of miraculous that people, children in particular, right? It's always compelling to think about children, but the people who are facing, like, I have a friend that her son had Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and after one treatment with gene therapy, all of a sudden he's able to walk and jump, and that was unimaginable prior to that. And so each of these stories, I feel like, give huge importance to understanding, like, medicine is changing in ways that were previously unimaginable. But to support those changes, right, it requires an incredible amount of science and support. And so, Simeon, I know that you were one of the funders for the first CRISPR therapy, which is, again, a radically transformative advancement. And I would love to think with you about how you think about risk in bringing these to market. So oftentimes the development costs are in the billions, right? And if you think about Carl bringing CAR-T to market, right, it took decades. So when you're looking at a pipeline that's decades long and it's likely going to cost billions of dollars, how do you think about risk and reward? And how are you so courageous?
It's a good question. Maybe first I'll start with a rebuttal. I am actually wearing socks. They're just really low-cut socks. So that's you won't.
I have no socks on.
Not wearing socks.
I should also say you're not the first person to make fun of me. My son, who's
I wasn't making fun of you. That was pure jealousy.
Okay. My son gave me a hard time before I came up.
Oh, really?
No socks.
Okay.
So, anyway, so I think each of these stories, truly is. It's a miracle, right? So I was in medical school not that long ago, and I think what we're seeing now and what you've described with these patients that are being treated, whether it's for sickle cell, whether it's for leukemia, these are like science fiction type ideas that I couldn't have even imagined like 10, 20 years ago, right? So I think work that's coming out of the lab of Carl and others, it's truly like, it's transformational for the way we think about the treatment, the diagnosis, the treatment, and potential cure of disease. And so it requires, a level of thoughtfulness around how you invest in these technologies, how you nurture them. And it's certainly the case that in today's environment, in particular with the cost of capital the way it is, the number of headwinds that, seemingly we're faced with, that level of thought and criticality of every step that we take is even more compelling or burdensome, frankly, in this current environment. And so, I think, there's some pretty simple decision rules that I guess we should think about. So the first is, these are truly, entrepreneurial endeavors that require incredible founders, entrepreneurs that are working in a startup mindset, that are, lean, that are operating efficiently, that are, following the science, following the data, are trying to be as truth-seeking as they can be in terms of seeing where the signal is and really pushing as hard as they can to continue to exemplify that. And so that's one piece, is like, assessing and really having a sense of the quality of the founding team and the capabilities that are required. On the capital formation side, it's thinking about things systematically and trying to, as best you can, over funding rounds, discharging risk, but also creating value through hitting certain important inflection points. And so, CRISPR is a great example. This is a discovery that has been made less than 15 years ago, right? So we've gone from this amazing discovery that's now won a Nobel Prize. It's now ubiquitous across academia, research, and industry, startups, large companies. But to see a technology being discovered to now having the first commercial product, I think you're right in saying, we're at the tip of the iceberg here in terms of the potential of a technology like this. And so capital infusion has to happen in a thoughtful way. But the third piece is it's important that there is some level of coalescing of capital that's coming from sources that include non-dilutive sources from pharma, from government funding, other ways to continue to augment what is a truly cost-prohibitive endeavor, right? And unlike technology companies, with biotechnology companies, the more successful you are, the more capital you require until you actually commercialize your products, right? So, it's sort of piecing together the puzzle between the quality of the team, their execution focus, picking the right targets, capitalizing to key inflection points, partnering with pharma through the development of the products, and then in most instances, again, having pharma be ultimately the marketer and distributor of the products, right? And this is a journey that can last years, if not decades.
Thanks for giving that. And it's helpful to think about, in many ways, the challenges are the same for, evaluating any potential venture, but certainly there are huge constraints given just the nature of the industry and the challenges in this market. And so we've thought about the cost from bringing these drugs from the bench, and now to think about the costs that we are facing at the bedside. David, many of these drugs cost north of $1 million for each individual that they're being treated, that's being treated. How should we think about how are we going to pay for this?
Yeah, it's a good point of view. This year so far, there are 17 cellular and molecular therapies that have come to market. The cheapest, quote, list price is $489,000. The most expensive list price is $3.2 million. That doesn't include all of the hospital and outpatient-related costs, which often are a multiple of 3 to 5 times that. So these are expensive, and I don't see anything that will drive those costs down over time. In fact, I think some of the complexities will drive the costs up. So this really raises a question that I will take a pause and do a quick economics lesson. Those of you that might have taken my classes at Wharton know that I tend to do that. But the issue that we have today is this. A drug that is used in typical medicine is a concomitant therapy. There's a doctor giving treatment, there's a specialist doing treatment, there's imaging, there's lab tests, there's hospitalizations, there's a drug being used, and if it's used correctly, those others costs get perhaps optimized. Then there are drugs like GLP-1s that Simeon mentioned from Lilly and Novo, which are really, in a way, substitutes for the streaming costs. Theoretically, if I can put someone on a GLP and they're compliant and they have the appropriate response, I can offset a huge amount of downstream in utilization and spending from diabetes or metabolic syndrome or potentially cardiovascular disease. It won't eliminate it completely, but we understand the clinical effect, but the economic effect, I think, is still waiting to be seen. How long of a lag before I can make up for these ongoing costs that I'm putting in on the front end so I don't have to have all the disease and burden on the back end. But when we talk about cellular and molecular therapies, we're talking about something even further than that because it's a one-time or a two-time treatment that would then be a substitute for that downstream utilization. And those costs in that treatment you can think of as capitalizing the spending stream. So I've now invested in a machine where I don't need labor to produce the product going forward. And the challenge with that is none of the governments, Medicare, Medicaid, commercial payers, any of the groups, employers who pay for health care have a mechanism for absorbing a multi-million-dollar infrequent or increasingly frequent cost. And we do not have a financing mechanism. Insurance, as we know, is how to spread costs fortuitously across a population. But to do this, we need to spread the cost of these drugs that are pulling all the cost you might encumber for years forward to one treatment cost into a generational shift. And that, to me, is the economic question of how do you structure into this risk pool, some way to finance these. So the adoption rate of these drugs is quite high, because today it's quite low. A very small share of people that are eligible for the Duchenne's drug, Elevidys, or the drugs for sickle cell, although it's fairly new out, and I could name 20 others, it's single digits to low teens adoption rates of the targeted population. Some of that's because there are very few centers that are credentialed to do the complex induction and administration, but a lot of it is an enormous hesitancy to actually say we will cover these drugs in the fear of actually being hit with these costs. GLP-1 adoption is a good example. We have a program called Encircle that has 13 million people in it. It's the largest program in the United States for GLP treatment, but it's only 13 million people in it, and it could be 50 million people in it. And so we don't have a mechanism for absorbing these substitutes or these capitalized substitutes, and that to me is a real public policy or market issue that we have to think about.
Do either of you have any solutions?
Well,
I appreciate the honesty.
I know the solution on paper. Okay, some people in this room may have a mortgage on your house. What did you do? You bought a house that you couldn't afford to pay for that day, but you spread the costs out over time, 30 years, 15 years. This is not unlike that. Some entity that's holding this population in a risk pool pays for the drug, and then it amortizes it out over time. The question is, with our multi-payer environment in healthcare, how do we determine accountability and enforce accountability for a health plan's 3 years that someone's living in there, and those 3 years of accumulated amortization of that cost? I believe an industry consortium could come forward and form that. It's a risk pool, just like we have done for other things. I think government could be in the background, although I don't think we want Medicare Part F that is like doing this, because then it will become, I think, something that we would not want. But you know, again, I am presuming that on a societal basis, these investments in a $3 to $5 million genetic therapy are actually beneficial on an economic basis because of productivity, because of lack of consumption of healthcare services that are potentially not contributory to real GDP growth. And the question then is not how do we pay for this expensive thing, it's how do we finance the capitalization of it. And I think that is a very solvable problem, because we have securitized climate change, we have securitized pork bellies and corn, and it's exactly the same phenomenon. We just have to apply it to life sciences.
Thank you for that. It's always nice when you can get to the point of having a solution rather than a problem. And
yeah, I wish I could actually do it, though.
Anyone?
Yeah, that was a call to arms for anyone to stand up that business.
But what I appreciate about this solution is what I think is also just endemic to the industry and the challenges facing it, right? Is it actually requires players oftentimes that have competing interests to come together to collaborate. And if you think about what's required to bring these drugs to market, it really does require all the pieces of the ecosystem to come together and work together collaboratively. And so with that in mind, I would love to ask you both, and then we'll see if you come up with the same answer or want to disagree with one another, about what do you think is the biggest non-scientific challenge that's facing the biotech industry right now? So whether that's access to capital, regulation, manufacturing, or perhaps something else.
I can start. I mean, I think, I don't know if anyone has seen the recent the Mission Impossible movie, where Tom Cruise and his intrepid team, navigate through all of these different challenges to ultimately save the world. I feel like biotechnology is in a similar position, where we've got all of those headwinds that you mentioned, and maybe 2 or 3 others that are working seemingly against ultimately the ability to bring these incredible new medicines forward, right? So I do think we're at this incredible point where, in my reckoning, like the business model of how we develop the products, how we pay for the products, is going through a pretty transformational, probably, set of questions and hopefully solutions that come from that, right? So, in my mind, like, I guess sitting as the allocator of capital into these sorts of businesses, I think the onus is on us to just continue to show true value in these products, right? Ultimately, I believe no matter who is in the White House or in Congress, everyone's intent is to have transformative treatments that are going to change the way we think about societal impact, right? At a individual level, at a societal level, right? And I believe that if you can develop these transformational therapies, there will be a reward for that in terms of the premium that the folks that took the risk will be able to benefit from, right? So I think it's incumbent on us to continue to push the envelope in terms of how we're developing these new treatments, and going after areas where there's clear unmet need, right? And head to toe, there's significant need. I think any of us who've been through any health issues for ourselves or our loved ones, you know that, in a situation that's dire, you want the best possible treatment, right? And there's so many areas now where we're still lacking, starting with your head, with everything that's happening neurodegenerative, neuropsychiatric. There's just more questions than answers at the moment, right? And so I think we have to be focused on getting to clear patient impact with the treatments that we're developing. I think there needs to be, and this is where I think with all the talk around AI, some way of turning on its head the way we think about timelines and efficiency of developing products. Certainly going through a lot of the initial steps of creating the chemical substrates, scaffolds, to then test in a in silico method before you then test in patients. If there's a way to somehow compress the timelines and the costs associated with that, that still gives us enough rigor around the quality of the data sets, that then requires the next step of the puzzle is regulators that are now empowered and forward-thinking in the way that they're evaluating those data sets to commercialize a product. So I think, compression of timelines, cost to develop the product, and that will be something that needs to continue to evolve. And then, again, I think in the context of how products are paid for, in my view, there's a societal contract that we are bringing products forward that are going to have the impact to humanity. There needs to be a way to justify the risk reward. But then, after the patent period has elapsed, these products are now available at fractions of the initial price, right? So I think each of these steps has in front of us now some incredible opportunities in my mind to be able to hopefully revamp and come up with a biotech business model that is fit for purpose for where we are in 2025, looking forward to the next 10, 15 years.
I don't disagree with anything he says, so I'll say something different. I think in the near term, the public still has not weighed in on how they feel about this. And I say that just as an illustration. You mentioned Duchenne's. There was a patient 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago that Sarepta announced who had taken a Levitus who died. And it was an outcry to pull the drug from the market. It was kind of a very iffy approval, I think. This was one of those ones where there was a lot of controversy in the FDA and in the advisory committees about should that drug come. But it's on the market, and I think if there's a spate of significant deaths or adversity in these treatment lines, you'll see a public recoil like you would in any advanced technology area. I'm presuming that we're being careful and won't do that, so I'll turn to the two issues that really concern me. Within the United States, we have been developing over time an increasingly have and have-nots healthcare system. And I know every country, even Canada, Britain, with socialized systems, have ways of opting out. But the levels of care that people get who have resources compared to those who don't is vastly different. And this will be the marker for these kinds of expensive therapies. We will have people that will get them readily and people that will have no access to them. And I think that will impair the underlying necessary fairness and societal adhesion around healthcare and can make our challenges worse. Secondly, globally, it's not clear to me at all, even though the US is by far the leader in developing these therapies. About 85% of the IP in this space today, and probably that much in the future few years, is American-developed IP. But it's not clear to me that we will win that race. If you look at what's being done, for example, in China, they are moving ahead very rapidly with much more aggression around the development of these therapies, way fewer checks and balances. And I think they see a global market of 7.6 billion people, just like we do, who could be the consumers of this vast multi-trillion-dollar armamentarium. So I don't know that the U.S. will win the internal war or the global war, but I think we are in a bit of a war to get these out into use fairly, safely, and effectively.
So it seems like there are a lot of challenges on the table. I want to pick up where you just left off, David, and also try to weave this in with a question from the audience. But all of this is happening, right, as you just alluded to, at a time when the National Security Commission on Emerging Biotech has warned that China is rapidly gaining dominance in the biotech field, and the U.S. risks falling behind a setback from which we may never recover. I would love to hear from both of you why that you started to allude to some of the regulatory pathways and timelines, why you think that's the case, if you really you think it's a significant threat, and perhaps also what we can learn from China.
I'm happy to start. Yeah, I mean, listen, I think, it's a threat as well as an opportunity. Like, from where I sit, the first thing to note is, that is an incredible country with talent, a population and talent that is motivated, that is driven, that is propelling our industry forward, right? So I think first you have to acknowledge the quality of the competition, right? And I think what that means for U.S. biotech, like entrepreneurs and founders, is like you have to work at the top of your game. You have to work harder, faster, because most likely whatever you're working on here, what China has shown now, I think credibly, is that they're able to fast follow on a lot of the innovation that's happening here. And so there is an urgency around moving quickly, right, within the context of what's happening certainly in the U.S. But I expect over time, I think where you were alluding to, David, they are actually going to become innovators. Like, they will be leading the charge in terms of what's happening from research into development. And so, we look at this on the one hand as an opportunity because we are building, again, companies and products that hopefully will serve humanity. And the U.S. is, of course, an incredibly important arena for us. And so we have been, over the last few years, sourcing assets from China and then putting them in the hands of experienced, what we call drug hunters, drug developers, who can then productize in the US or in Europe in a way that, again, we have confidence they understand what is required to take products through those steps. And so for us, we think of it as an accelerator to ultimately bringing new products forward right now, right? And I think that what we're seeing on the pharma side is, in the last few years, a growing receptivity and interest and, frankly, ability to actually acquire assets that are directly coming from China, right? And so I think some of the most recent data I've seen is that close to 30% of deal making that pharma has done has been from pharma companies acquiring assets or companies out of China, right? So that is, I think that train has left the station. That will continue to be something that we should expect. And so again, I think it's incumbent on the US, Europe, et cetera, to have an ability to facilitate the way products are able to move forward. And this is where, again, I think regulatory interactions are critical, because from what we're seeing, China is able to expedite a lot of these steps. And again, we have to be careful, because ultimately patient safety is the first and foremost thing that we need to care about. But we need to be competitive in the context of how we efficiently move products forward in certain regions that can allow, again, there to be an equilibrating of sort of the way we think about the competitive dynamics. So on the one hand, there's a threat there, but there's an opportunity. Going back to my previous point, like, this is now an environment where we need truly best-in-class entrepreneurs, founders that are working on incredibly hard problems and are really pushing the envelope. And I think ultimately, if they're successful, we all as a society will benefit from that.
Yeah, nothing to add. I completely agree with that point of view. So,
could I follow up and push a little bit on trying to connect these pieces to something that you were talking about before, David, that you are incredibly passionate about, which is thinking about trying to get access to these drugs. So if we think about in lower and middle income countries, right, my understanding is that the challenges arising within many of these, within many cell and gene therapies, isn't just the cost to develop them and bring them to market, but actually delivering treatments, and the operational logistics also are associated with significant cost. And so it's, how do you see sort of the distribution of these drugs also perhaps changing over time, or do you think that that represents another separate barrier?
Yeah, so let's just step back and frame what's at stake here is that if you play forward these drugs and the effect that they can have in the accumulation of not only today's knowledge, but tomorrow's knowledge on the breadth of the number of targets that we can manipulate with them, both in the ethical medical area, but as well as performance enhancement, capability enhancement areas. This will be a vast market. It could be one of the largest markets in the global economy. That's what's at stake between the rivalry of nations. But the flip side of it is it will leave out most countries where the spending on this would exceed their total gross domestic product in healthcare. And so this question becomes one of stratified financing, which I think is quite interesting given the MFN debates around drug pricing today in the United States. We're going to have a mechanism that can dramatically lower the cost of the R&D, can dramatically lower the cost of the induction, infusion, and adoption of the drugs. And I think that's going to rely upon continued scientific breakthroughs. This is incredibly complicated now to do, but it's way even better than it was 2 years ago when there was a significant morbidity and death rate and cytokine storms and many things that are now in the past. So I think R&D will take us in the right direction. These will not become routinized that you'll go to the drugstore and get your gene therapy and go on with your day, but I think they will become quite routinized. I do expect there to be centers, and I mean that by both geographic centers, but institutional centers where these are done. And those will become quite significant parts of our medical ecosystem. And I think what's at stake for us is that the United States builds and develops and supports these in advance of the rest of the world, so we become the place that people come to get these therapies.
That's beautiful, and I love where you started by thinking about even just looking 2 years back, how much has changed. And in a question from the audience, they said in the last panel that there was a warning against thinking in terms of decades. And I think that's true not only in AI, but I think that that's true in biotech, that things are moving so fast. And so for the last question that I'd love to leave you with, so I'd love to hear from both of you, if you think about looking forward 2 or 3 years from now, where do you think the greatest promise lies? And what do you think where will be the greatest area of excitement?
Yeah, I mean, I can start. I mean, again, we started with the discussion on these amazing cell therapies, CAR T therapies, gene editing medicines, Casgevy, et cetera. You know, I think this field in the next 2 to 3 years, we are going to continue to see just some amazing data sets, clinical impact that takes these technologies from small patient populations into, you know, ultimately the largest categories in terms of overall impact on morbidity or mortality. And so specifically cardiovascular disease, cancer, and diabetes. You're going to see data sets, and you're already seeing them in real time, where using technologies like CRISPR, gene editing, we're able to design molecules, CAR T therapies that rather than taking your cells, you know, and doing this cumbersome engineering process outside of the body, it will be done in vivo. It'll be done inside your body. That's a great example of something that is in process right now. In the context of diabetes, you know, we have data now that is showing for the first time essentially creating an artificial pancreas, the function ultimately that will allow us to control your sugar levels. Again, these are things that sound like science fiction, but they are nearer to reality than you can even imagine. And then certainly in cardiovascular disease, right? I think, David, you were alluding to this. There is the hope, the potential for a one-and-done type therapy, whether it's for your high cholesterol or for other types of cardiovascular insults, right? And so these are things that, you know, I am hopeful that we will get these products to the point where they become something that the commercialization is the problem that we're solving for. It's not, can we actually do this, right? So this is an incredible era to be living, to be working in this field, and for all of us to hopefully benefit from treatments that are truly transformational in the way that we think about, again, disease treatment or cure. So that a lot more to come.